All right, I'm Bill Collins, captain of the Des Moines Fire Department, as everyone should know. Here at Station 8 on August 25th, we had an MCI drill at the airport, and it was basically a mass of everyone throughout Polk County that was going to be involved. So we had a plane go down. When we arrived, we didn't know exactly how many souls on board. There's approximately 70. So with that, there was multi-jurisdictional entities involved, and we'll go with that. We're going to kind of start with how we arrived on scene and what we did. When we get done with that, we'll talk about what we felt could have went better if we would have tweaked it and changed it a little bit. So I was on Engine 8, so they had Medigate arrive first on scene, which normally they would probably beat us there by a little bit. Des Moines Airport Crash Fire Rescue was on scene taking care of the fire. They have 3 people on a shift, so 2 of them are already in the crash truck, and then the third one started setting up as a command. So with that, we'll roll over to Medigate because they arrived first.
All right, so we arrived, we pulled in, felt like several minutes before anybody else got there. So we pull in, and it was Josh and I got out of the rig and just looked at a sea of people laying on the runway, far as you can see. Started off with asking the walking wounded to come using the PA system on the squad. Not as many people came that we were hoping. So we had a group of people walk over. They would be our greens, the walking wounded. So they came over. At that point, we got out and kind of looked around, and in this situation we're supposed to be being assigned titles and roles. So our roles, our titles, we would not have been doing hands-on skills at this point, but it felt like we were just standing there looking at a bunch of people screaming. So started a little quick triage with the people who were in my immediate area, so I could pass that on once more resources arrived. Once more resources arrived, we started delegating, getting different tasks. I ended up as the EMS group supervisor. Josh was a triage officer. And once more resources arrived, that's when things really started to come together. Before that, it feels like you're just standing there, outnumbered, helpless, just kind of taking it all in, formulating a plan in your head until people get there to help. So that's kind of how we started. Once resources arrived, Lieutenant Guffey was assigned staging. Engineer Stokes was assigned transportation. And then another source, it was airport fire personnel. They were simulating being DMFD personnel. He was assigned treatment. So that's kind of how we broke down. And then we started getting into our own roles and taking steps to mitigate the situation. That's about it for the beginning.
I was on Truck 8 that day, and Engine 8 had assigned our positions, and I was assigned to staging. My engineer was assigned to transportation. And so I went ahead and assigned our firefighter to triage, and then I went about looking for a good place to stage, and the gate that we just came in had a good open area to stage in, so that was staging and had easy access to the crash site. So I set that up, and everything went pretty good there. I could tell that the transportation officer was just getting overwhelmed with radio traffic. So throughout the process, I was calling the medical group supervisor, letting him know what we had in staging. And so I think it kind of eased up the transportation's role there a little bit, and just letting him know when we had resources in there so that he could use them as quickly as possible if he needed them.
So we, both of us were assigned to triage. We had one other individual in triage also that was helping out. I think that went pretty well with figuring out what we had, getting a number of, obviously we had already called to get the greens walking to their staging area. So the majority of what we had left was yellows and reds. So I think we did a pretty quick job of getting everybody tagged appropriately, and once we all kind of had a good idea of what kind of numbers we had, we were able to contact our triage supervisor, let him know, how many numbers of each that we had. With the exception of the greens, we didn't have any idea how many greens we had at the time. But so I think getting those together were good, and so then we were able to get, once we had a number of reds, I think they had the people that were assigned to treatment were able to come down and initially start getting the reds loaded out of there quickly and get them to their staging area, and then from there we were able to move the yellow victims and start getting them into the treatment area, which was kind of Josh's expertise there.
So I was assigned the role of triage officer. Initially, when we got on scene, we didn't really have a lot of personnel to work with. So like Jeremy mentioned, we started triaging in our immediate area until we got more resources deployed to us. And in a mass casualty situation like this, most of the resources initially went to triage. It's like Captain Collins said, we had over 70 bodies that needed triaged. So when I initially started delegating authority to them to start the triage process, I instructed them to get numbers of how many they triaged, so we had an idea of how many yellows and reds we had. And it wasn't until they got triaged and moved to a treatment areas when I started getting hard numbers to report to Jeremy and to IC as far as what we need for transportation capabilities. So the initial triage was difficult in getting those initial numbers, and then as we got more resources on scene, everybody moved from triaging to treatment, but then the important part was re-triaging our reds and yellows to make sure that they're triaged appropriately, and if their condition worsened or improved, things that needed to be known as they're being treated. And sometimes treatment provided that they upgraded from probably a red to a yellow patient. So re-triage was kind of something that just needed to happen on a continuous basis. On those triage cards, there are areas, like they mentioned, to get more information, maybe name some of the demographics, record some vitals, if it was appropriate to get vitals from them on time, so that when they got transported to a hospital, they at least had a baseline to go off of.
Okay, so they kind of talked about what their roles were. I was on Engine 8. We arrived right behind. I felt like right behind Medicaid. They said there was just a little bit of delay. Once we arrived, I assumed IC. I could see that we were in a mass casualty incident situation, so I declared that. Started Polk County disaster, let them know. Started a second alarm to get more personnel out there, and also I knew we was going to have to set up a unified command with airport personnel and everything. So with all that being done, it's kind of simultaneously, I assigned all their positions to them, which they've talked about already, and I went directly to their instant command vehicle and set up a unified command, and that included the airport firefighters, Des Moines Fire Department, and operations, their Des Moines airport operations, and the Des Moines police officers are at the scene also. So that was a group of initial unified command. Started with 20 ambulances, just going by reports, thinking that we could get 20 on the way. Obviously that's not my responsibility where they come from, because we have that all set up with team cards. Some dispatch will know how to get 20 ambulances on scene. It's quite a bit chaotic, trying to figure out where everything needs to happen, but once you get those positions assigned, they take over and set up where the triage would work the best, where treatment would work the best, where the transportation would work, where staging is going to work. So I immediately went to the Unified Command and started setting that up. Once Chief Hasse arrived on scene, he took over as Instant Command in the Unified Command, and then I took over the safety. And basically safety was, I was just roving, make sure nobody was out in an area where they could get hurt. If they were doing something that didn't look quite right, quite safe, we had a discussion. Everybody kind of understands what safety role is because we use that all the time on Instant Command. We had some, after talking it over, we'd done everything, we had some points that we thought might work better. So we got a sheet here of what we talked about, and so they're kind of a little bit of a bullet point of what could have been better, what we felt went fine. So we're just going to, it's not in any particular order, we're just going to kind of go down through what we wrote down, and then if somebody wants to specifically that was involved in that, talk to it, then they can talk about it. We'll talk about on the triage, on treatment area. Our treatment guy's not here, he's with Des Moines Airport, so Josh, I want you to talk about how he thought, lining up on using the tarps and how to get, because it was kind of confusing. If you use the tarps and throw everybody on them, who got second triage, who didn't get second triaged. So I'll let Josh talk about how we thought we could line that up a little better.
So to establish the treatment areas for different crudities of patients, we had tarps that were spread out, and they use those tarps as like a patient gathering area. An idea for improvement was brought up to just stage equipment on the actual tarps. That way there you can put your patients around the perimeter of the tarp, and it'll make it a little easier to track which patients were initially triaged and re-triaged, what their acuity was. Like Captain Collins said, the initial problem was they're just putting them on the tarps. So to treat them and to re-triage them, you'd have to step over patients, not really making it convenient for us to give those patients what they needed. So like he said, equipment and personnel should be on the tarps. Patients should go around the perimeter of the tarps, just to ease the access to those patients. I can't really speak on what went well in the treatment area. Like I said, I was with triage, but for future reference, that's probably what would make it better.
As far as getting to the patients to that point, we made the decision based on other training in like the active threat situation stuff, of getting all the reds to the red as soon as possible, all the yellows to the yellow as soon as possible. That way, instead of treating a red over there and a red over there and a red over there, you could bring them all together kind of in one area where we have more resources, more tools, more equipment, and you're closer to the transportation area. So I think we did a good job of doing that. But then, as Josh was saying, I think it was Captain Westhoff's suggestion is to line people around that a little more organized. But I think we did a good job of getting everybody there instead of trying to handle a bunch of reds scattered throughout the runway. We got them all in one spot. And then we can improve that with what we're talking about.
To expand on what Josh was saying with the treatment, after we got done with triage, I got assigned briefly to treatment, and it was very difficult to see who had been treated initially. I think we need to get a better system as far as writing down vitals or doing some sort of tagging system to say this person has been seen once and this treatment has been done on them, because we really didn't have any idea. It's almost like we were stepping over people, asking them if they had been treated, and so it's it's if they're not in the right mind to tell us yes I've been treated, or they're not real sure what the situation is. So lining them up and having some sort of way, even if it's just putting like a piece of tape on them or something, that they have initially been treated, and have some initial vitals and stuff, so that we can either start going back on those initial patients or continue down the line treating them. So I think is one thing that we ran up against.
One part that was difficult there, it kind of comes with inherent difficulty with a simulated drill, is you'll ask somebody if they've been treated and they're like, yeah, I have needle decompression, and you're like, oh, and it's laying next to them. So in the real world, you'd probably be able to see that they've had a needle decompression, but for the sake of a drill, you don't always see the treatment. So that's just kind of one of the difficulties also that comes along with the simulation.
And then since our transportation person's not here, basically we found out it might be easier to put make sure the transportation person's between where they're being treated and where they're going to pick them up to transport. So we make sure that there is a link between getting the tags to them as they're being transported, so somebody doesn't get overlooked and get lost. And I said, yeah, if we miss one person, that doesn't seem like a lot, but if it's you're that one person, that would be huge. So that's kind of another thing is that the transportation director could use maybe another hand to do a little more scribing, to keep up with. When you're trying to move 70 people as fast as you can, that's a lot of work for one person to try to keep that up. And we have a little freelancing, which is you're always going to do that. They're assigned to a job, and then their job they don't feel they're doing anything in. So then they see something that they feel like they can help with, so they move off their job. And then when you need them again, they're not there. So always stay on task, and that's anywhere fireground. You stay on your task and don't get caught up with, well, I look like I should be doing this instead of what I was told to. Basically, that's about all we have. IMS system worked out well. We stayed within that. Communications between our group supervisors went well. Like the triage people knew they need to get a hold of the triage director, so they could, if they had anything, it didn't go past them. And so there was like 4 or 5 people on the radio talking. Chief Ossie liked the idea of having a second channel talking directly to our dispatch, and that way all the talk on the incident was on one channel, which we went to mix tap 1, which everybody in Polk County should have. And then he kept on and he went to TAC 7 or 8, I believe, on our channel, and he talked to our dispatcher, so it was a little easier for him to make those communications. Basically, about the last thing I would like to talk about is when you're doing triage, what is a priority 1, priority 2, priority 3? Senior Medic Ignore had a good way to say, this is what you can do real quick to decide whether they're a priority 1 or a priority 2. Obviously priority 3s are green, and they've walked away. They should be walking away, so they're not on the scene. So now what's still on the scene is either a red or a yellow. So I want Jeremy to explain what he come up with, and it was easy, it made a lot of sense, and go ahead and just briefly talk about
Sure.
that.
I can't take credit for it. It's just something I learned along the way. But it was 32 can do. So if their respirations are 30 or greater, their capillary refill is less than 2 seconds, or greater than 2 seconds. And if they can or can't follow orders. So if it's greater than 30 respirations, they're automatically a red. If their cap refill is greater than 2 seconds, they're automatically a red. If they can't follow commands, they're automatically a red. So you just tag that person, move on to the next one. If they are able to do all 3 of those, or meet all 3 of that criteria, but they weren't able to walk to the green area or whatever, then they would automatically be a yellow. So just boom, tag them a yellow, move on to the next one, and just go right down the line, nice and quick. And then you can re-triage later on, get vital signs later. But for the initial triage, it's just those 3 criteria, tag them, get them moved to the centralized location, and then re-triage and treat from there.
That's pretty much what we come up with and how we took care of it, and hopefully this will help people that might have the same situation.